I stood by the window, watching as the car backed out of the driveway, turned right, and gradually faded from view down the street. Surprisingly, I felt a peculiar lack of emotional level, despite witnessing a decade of my life drive away. Shouldn't there have been a flood of sentiments? Shouldn't I have been more than nonchalant, simply thinking, "Oh well, I suppose I should attend to that leaking faucet"? As I made my way to the kitchen, I mentally replayed the events of the past half hour. Upon returning from work, I found Jane seated at the kitchen table with a full glass of wine, a scene that immediately struck me as unusual. Firstly, she was home before me, a rare occurrence given her usual late return. Secondly, our tacit agreement was that whoever arrived first would start dinner, yet there was no sign of cooking. Lastly, the glass of wine was out of character for Jane, who seldom indulged. Without delay, she asked me to join her and delivered her revelation. "Simon, I'm sure you've sensed it too. Something has felt off between us for the past 6 months. I can't pinpoint the cause, whether it's me or you, but there's a disconnection. I've attempted to broach the topic with you, only to be met with reassurances that it's just a rough patch. But I've reached a decision. We need some time apart. Not divorce, just a separation. I feel like I need space, Simon. Time to reflect on my life and decipher where things have gone astray between us. Perhaps you could use this time to do the same. Come on, Jane. It's not that dire. Every marriage has its bumps. We can work through this together, but not if we're apart and not communicating. Talking won't solve everything, Simon. You see our issue as solely a lack of physical intimacy, but there's more to it. We've lost the closeness we once had because I'm uncomfortable with your touch, and I can't even explain why. I still love you just as much, but something's not right, and I need time to figure it out. So you're suggesting we throw away 10 years of marriage? No, Simon, I'm suggesting we take a breather. I've already packed my things. I'll be staying with my sister until I find a place. I'll check in with you once a week." With that, she rose, mentioning an appointment with her sister, and left without so much as a goodbye kiss, leaving me with a clear understanding of where I stood. News of Jane and my separation spread quickly among our circle of friends. Most offered sympathy and made efforts to lift my spirits. Jane maintained weekly calls, asking about my well-being, and I'd respond with assurances that I was coping. In turn, I'd inquire about her, and she claimed to be doing fine. Each time, I tentatively broached the subject of her returning home, only to be met with a vague, "not yet." 6 weeks passed, and unsettling rumors began to surface. Whispers insinuated that Jane had taken up with a live-in boyfriend. I resisted believing such gossip, clinging to the hope that she truly desired solitary reflection before reconciling. Yet, as the rumors persisted, I resolved to investigate. Determined to put these whispers to rest, I planned to discreetly locate Jane's whereabouts. However, my inquiries yielded no leads. It seemed no one was willing or able to divulge her location. Suspicion began to gnaw at me. During dinner with my friends Neil and Mia, I confided my apprehensions, inadvertently mentioning my intention to hire a private investigator. "Save your money, Simon," Neil interjected, his tone grave. "The rumors are true. Most people in our circle are aware, but they cared too much to tell you." "Tell me what?" I demanded, my heart sinking. "Jane left you for Oscar Young," Neil divulged. "Oscar Young? Who on earth is Oscar Young? I've never heard of him." "He's a colleague of Jane's," Neil clarified. "She's been involved with him for nearly a year. I reckon she initiated the separation as a contingency plan in case living with him didn't pan out as expected. And everyone knew this, yet no one thought to inform me." I seethed. What wonderful friends I have. I rose abruptly from the table, tossing my napkin onto the center, and declared, "Thank you for the enlightenment. I'll see myself out." As I walked home, a storm of realization churned within me. A year devoid of intimacy, of affection, all while Jane clandestinely betrayed our vows. I had waited obediently, naively, while my supposed friends knowingly watched me suffer in silence. But the time for waiting had ended. The following morning, I promptly scheduled an appointment with the Corliss Investigative Agency and provided them with a retainer. Detailing Jane and Young's workplace, I instructed them to gather all pertinent information about the two. Returning home, I began crafting a comprehensive list of tasks necessary to sever ties with Jane. I intended to await the detective agency's report before finalizing my plans, ensuring I was fully prepared. As I reflected on my situation, I realized another pressing matter demanded attention. Enduring nearly 16 months of celibacy due to Jane's rejection and subsequent separation, I resolved to reclaim my desires. Knowing Jane's penchant for meticulous planning, I pondered the possibility of her anticipating my reaction and devising countermeasures, particularly regarding infidelity accusations that she could leverage in a divorce. Realizing the potential futility of my initial list, I started anew, recognizing the need for immediate action. Certain actions needed swift execution, not procrastination. Furthermore, I identified strategies to retaliate against Jane, pondering whether she had contingencies in place for her own downfall. The next morning, while depositing my paycheck at the bank, I discreetly checked on the safe deposit box shared with Jane. Observing her frequent access to the box, I deduced she was monitoring my movements closely, poised to react at the first sign of suspicion. With a moment's consideration, I removed the 5 certificates of deposit from their envelopes and used the bank's copy machine to duplicate them. Returning the copies to their original envelopes, I replaced them in the box, confident Jane wouldn't detect the switch unless she scrutinized the CDs closely. Recognizing Jane's vigilance, I made a casual mention to the bank staff of my plans for a fishing trip to Mexico, retrieving my passport from the box. With the CDs now in my possession, I resolved to cash one each week, discreetly stashing the proceeds at home. Knowing Jane kept tabs on me, I retrieved my passport from the bank's safe deposit box, casually mentioning to the attendant my upcoming fishing trip to Mexico. With the 5 CDs now in hand, a routine visit to the bank twice a week facilitated cashing 1 CD at a time, promptly stowing away the funds upon my return home. Unlike Jane's reliance on credit cards, I preferred a more cautious approach. My collection comprised only an American Express card with a full balance payment requirement, a few gasoline company cards, and a single Visa card with a modest limit in my name alone. Aware of Jane's substantial credit card inventory, I meticulously tracked their balances, ensuring minimum payments to maintain their standing. Seated at my computer, I compiled a list of desired items before indulging in a spending spree over the following weeks, charging purchases to Jane's credit cards. When the time came for my departure, she'd be left grappling with considerable debt. Upgrades to my technology arsenal included a new Dell computer, a Remington 700 rifle from eBay, a state-of-the-art digital camera, and a multifunctional cell phone. While the house belonged solely to Jane, I realized its significance as collateral for our previous home improvements, securing an open line of credit with both our signatures. Though we had cleared the debt, the line remained accessible. Jane's decision to leave me in the house during our separation now made sense. It kept me complacent, expecting her return, and undermining the seriousness of our situation. Closing out my $400 at work, I absorbed the penalties, squirreling away to cash for future use. With all preparations in place, I awaited the private detective's report, poised for the next phase of my plan. The one puzzle I couldn't solve was how to fulfill my physical needs without arousing Jane's suspicion. I couldn't risk her having someone tail me if I attempted to find companionship elsewhere. My solution: weekend fishing trips out of town. Jane knew my love for fishing and my frequent excursions, evidenced by the catches I brought home. I doubted she'd hire a private detective to shadow me. There was no need for her to go overboard, right? After all, wasn't I the fool? Hadn't she duped me for over a year? One Friday, just as I was wrapping up work, I received a call from Mia, asking me to swing by their house on my way home. Despite my reluctance, she insisted it was urgent, so I reluctantly agreed. Upon arrival, Mia ushered me into the living room, where Neil was seated in an armchair. He rose to greet me, offering a handshake before suggesting I make myself comfortable while he fetched a beer. "Mia needs to speak with you, Simon, and I'm fully supportive of what she's about to say," Neil informed me before disappearing into the kitchen. As I glanced at Mia, she gestured for me to wait, hinting that I'd need the beer for what was to come. Neil returned with a Bud Light, announcing his departure for errands, leaving Mia and me alone to converse. "Simon, you wounded us when you stormed out that evening," Mia began, preempting any interruption. "While your reaction was justified, it still stung. We cared deeply for you, and we hoped Jane would come to her senses and return to where she belongs with you. We know you love her, or at least you did, but we weren't sure if it was enough for you to forgive her, so we kept silent. We wished for reconciliation without the need for forgiveness and forgetfulness. That's our apology, but there's more to why Neil and I asked you to visit." She paused, then continued with a direct question. "Simon, we know you well. We know you're not the type to stray. How long has it been since you last had intimacy?" The unexpected question caught me off guard. Mia, clad in a low-cut blouse accentuating her ample cleavage, a short skirt, and high heels, exuded confidence. Neil's earlier assurance, "I'm 100% on board," suddenly resonated, and I sensed the direction this conversation was taking. With a subdued tone, I confessed that it had been a year and a half since I'd been intimate. As Mia leaned in closer, her suggestive tone sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, citing my friendship with Neil as a barrier. But Mia's firm grip on my arm kept me seated, assuring me that Neil was not only aware but supportive, having left to afford us privacy. It wasn't out of pity, rather, they had deliberated this for months. Then, dropping her voice huskily, she confessed her desire to change my situation. "Neil's my friend, Mia. I can't do that to him," I protested, starting to rise from my seat. But Mia's determined hold on my arm prevented my escape. "Neil's okay with this, Simon. He left to give us some time alone. It's not about pity or mercy, it's about mutual understanding. Neil and I have discussed this extensively. You have something we want, so hopefully I can help you, and you can help us," she explained, her voice unwavering. "I don't understand," I stammered, still reeling from Mia's revelation. "To put it plainly, Simon, Neil is sterile, and we want a child. We want you to be the father," Maya stated matter-of-factly. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I sat there in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the enormity of what she was proposing. Finally finding my voice, I managed to utter, But you said you knew I wouldn't betray Jane." "I did," Maya acknowledged, her tone steady. "But that was before you learned the truth about Jane's actions. Now that you know, you're free from the commitments you made to her." "Why me?" I asked, struggling to grasp the reasoning behind their request. "We want someone we know, someone we trust, to be the father," Mia explained patiently. "We want you to be involved in the child's life, to be their godfather, and always be there as Uncle Simon." "This doesn't make sense," I protested, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of their proposal. Mia countered, "It makes perfect sense. Consider the uncertainties of relying on an anonymous sperm donor. What if something happens to Neil and me? Who better to care for the child than Uncle Simon? And in worst-case scenarios, like needing a liver transplant, would we be able to locate the donor? Even if we did, would they be willing to help? We've considered all possibilities, Simon. We want you to be a part of our family. We help each other," she said. "Now we can go to the bedroom and get on with the continuation of our species." I obeyed. When we were done, before we went home, she kissed me and said goodbye. "I hope you realize that this is not our last meeting of this kind. Call me tomorrow." As I drove home, the weight of recent events consumed my thoughts. Parking in the driveway, a nagging concern emerged. If Jane had someone keeping tabs on me, My visits to Neil and Mia's house would certainly raise eyebrows. Surely, if they observed Neil's departure while I remained for hours afterward, it would arouse suspicion. The following morning, I phoned Mia to share my apprehensions. To my relief, she assured me that Neil didn't actually leave. He simply retreated to his workshop until I departed. However, this revelation gave me pause. Commend bringing myself to be intimate with Mia knowing Neil was just downstairs. Sensing my hesitation, Mia offered reassurance. Later that afternoon, Neil called, inviting me for a drink after work. The prospect felt incredibly awkward. How does one sit down with a friend of 20 years, knowing you've been intimately involved with his wife, with his knowledge? Neil seemed to understand my discomfort and wasted no time addressing the situation head-on. I know this is uncomfortable for you, Simon, Neil began, his tone serious. But I need to talk to you about our situation. First off, and I want to reiterate this, I am 100% okay with what happened between you and Mia. But there's more to this story that Mia didn't share. To be honest, I've been unable to perform sexually for over a year. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks, so that's why Mia had been so eager last night. She was compensating for Neil's inability. Her earlier remarks about not wanting to give Neil sloppy seconds were meant to conceal his impotence out of concern for his pride. It was a stark contrast to Jane's self-centeredness. Mia's priority was Neil, even in challenging circumstances, while Jane only considered herself. I don't know if you noticed last night, Neil continued, but Mia is incredibly attractive. My inability to perform sexually was really getting to her. She's been trying hard to cope, Simon, but sooner or later, she was going to seek intimacy elsewhere. I know it sounds harsh, but that's the reality. Despite her love for me, she'd struggle to hide her infidelity, but I'd know. How could I not? Her frustration would diminish, and I'd pick up on it. I love Mia, Simon. She means everything to me. Without her, I'd be lost. But that's the dilemma. If she were to sneak off and cheat behind my back, I couldn't stay with her. I'd understand why she did it, but I couldn't tolerate the deceit. The only solution, as far as I could see, was to address it openly. But Mia isn't the type to simply take a lover and retreat to the bedroom, while I sit in the living room watching TV. She might manage a one-time thing with a stranger in a motel room without me knowing, but she couldn't handle being with different men week after week, knowing I was aware. What we needed was someone reliable, someone we both liked and felt comfortable with. We sat down and brainstormed a list of potential candidates, but couldn't come to a consensus on anyone. You kept coming up, but we hesitated because if we started with you, and then Jane returned home, it would complicate things. Eventually, Jane would find out about Oscar Young's true nature and come back to you, thinking you were oblivious to her affair. I don't understand why she underestimates you like that. Perhaps she believes your love for her blinds you to any suspicion of her infidelity. I chuckled at the irony. She pretty much had me pegged right. That's exactly how it played out. It took the prolonged separation for me to realize something wasn't right. Well, you know now, and I know even if Jane doesn't, that now that you do know, she's history. I know you won't take her back under any circumstances. That realization freed up Mia and me to approach you. We want to have a child with you, Simon. Mia needs consistent intimacy, and until the doctors can diagnose and resolve my issue, someone else will have to fulfill that need. It might sound strange, but your intimacy with my wife could save my marriage. You just need to come to terms with the fact that I'm aware and completely okay with it. I was at a loss for words. The situation was beyond bizarre, even though it had already occurred once. Neil gazed into his drink before meeting my eyes again. It's tearing me apart not being able to satisfy my wife, Simon, but losing her would be even worse. I need you to do this for me, buddy. Can I rely on you? After a moment of contemplation, I nodded in agreement. On Monday afternoon, I met with Martin Harris from the Corliss Agency. As he handed me the report, he expressed his regret, saying, "I'm sorry. Every time I do one of these things, I hope it's all a simple misunderstanding. But there's no doubt here. Your fee also covers our court appearance on your behalf if it comes to that." I shook his hand and left his office. Driving home, I realized I wasn't as enraged as I expected to be. Perhaps it was because I had already come to terms with the truth before receiving the report. What was my next move? Nothing I hadn't already planned. The only remaining task was timing the draw on the house line of credit, so Jane wouldn't catch wind of it until it was too late. I would consult with an attorney to prepare the necessary paperwork, but I wouldn't serve her until I was fully prepared. Over the next 5 weeks, I spent a considerable amount of time with Neil and Mia, meeting them at their house or mine 3 or 4 times a week. They spread the word that I was going through a tough period, and they were trying to lift my spirits. Meanwhile, my weekly phone calls with Jane continued, but I stopped inquiring about her well-being or when she planned to return home. Eventually, I reached my limit. After writing checks against the line of credit and ensuring they cleared, I swiftly found an apartment, moved out of the house, and had Jane served with divorce papers. The grounds cited were irreconcilable differences instead of adultery. This approach was deliberate. I didn't want Jane to know that I was aware of Young. Instead, I wanted her to perceive it as my attempt to encourage her to return home. Predictably, she called, insisting that I was overreacting and suggesting we meet for a drink and dinner to talk things through. I agreed, intending to buy time for the line of credit checks to clear and to empty our checking and savings accounts. As anticipated, Jane's initial response followed the expected script. She called, trying to convince me to avoid legal proceedings. I stood firm, explaining that I was tired of the ambiguous situation we were in. "I understand, Jane," I replied calmly. "You don't want to be with me, so it's time for me to accept it and move on with my life." Agreeing to meet her at Angelo's, I couldn't help but notice how good she looked. Despite missing her and still harboring love for her, I knew deep down that living with her again was impossible. But I kept that to myself, opting instead to listen as she fed me a line of excuses. She claimed to be seeing an analyst, working on herself, and making progress, begging for just a little more time. "I know it's hard on you, baby, but it's just as hard on me. Please, baby, please, just a little more time," she pleaded. I assured her I would consider it and let her know. 2 days later, I contacted my attorney, signaling it was time for the next step. The divorce papers were quashed and Jane received a notice of cancellation. Her gratitude over the phone was evident, but she was oblivious to my true intentions. That evening at Neil and Mia's over dinner, Mia dropped a bombshell. I was going to be a father. I smiled, knowing my interactions with Jane and Young would soon come to an end. "I'll probably be out of town for a while," I informed Mia, preparing for the final act of the trade with Jane and Young. "Just don't do anything too drastic, love," Mia urged. "I need my baby's father around." After being elected Surgeon at Arms for the Fraternal Order of Eagles, Oscar Young left Wednesday's meeting in high spirits. Conversations with influential members fueled his optimism as he began to entertain thoughts of running for higher office within the organization. His mood remained buoyant as he exited his car in the condo parking lot. But as he turned, a sudden excruciating pain engulfed him, plunging him into darkness. Discovered by a neighbor, who promptly called 911, Young was rushed to the hospital with severe injuries. Upon regaining consciousness in the hospital room, he found himself immobilized, his limbs encased in plaster and suspended in traction. Through the haze of pain, he spotted Jane at his bedside, her expression a mixture of horror and shock, before slipping back into unconsciousness. Though I wasn't present at the time, I received a detailed account of the incident. A man entered the room, approached Jane, who stood beside Young's bed, and handed her a set of papers. Confirming her identity as Jane Green, she received the papers, only to discover she was being served with divorce papers citing infidelity. As she read the word infidelity and glanced at Young's broken form, a wave of comprehension washed over her. With a stricken expression, She sank into a nearby chair, overcome with tears and disbelief, uttering, "Oh my God." I remained on the scene long enough to answer the police's inquiries about my whereabouts that night. As it turned out, I had an airtight alibi. I was engrossed in a poker game that kicked off an hour before the Eagles meeting and extended an hour past Young's hospitalization. Jane inadvertently footed the bill for my alibi, although my buddies would have covered for me gratis. However, I decided to utilize her credit cards to express my gratitude. The home shopping network happily charged her Visa for the digital cameras I gifted to Q and Bob, while eBay processed her MasterCard for the laptop I bestowed upon Joseph and the 19-flat screen monitor I gave to Ken. She even funded the purchase of the aluminum baseball bat. With 6 weeks of vacation and 3 weeks of comp time accrued, I opted for a 2-month leave of absence, leveraging my accumulated time off. Once the authorities concluded I had no involvement in Young's unfortunate incident, or at least none they could prove, I arranged to depart town for an extended fishing trip in Mexico. Prior to my departure, I instructed my lawyer to refrain from pushing the divorce proceedings. Instead, I wanted the paperwork to linger until Jane decided to contest it, at which point we would simply let it drop. We'd remain legally married, but I'd maintain my distance from her. I made weekly calls to Neil and Mia to check on developments, learning that Jane had returned to the house. However, it seemed that true love wasn't in the cards for Jane and Young, as she never visited him again following the day she was served with divorce papers beside his hospital bed. The onslaught of maxed-out credit card bills must have hit Jane like a ton of bricks. Followed by the shock of discovering our savings and checking accounts were depleted, the line of credit was maxed out, and the CDs in the bank deposit box were phony. Soon after, word began to circulate that Jane was desperately searching for me, but my boss, who was privy to the situation, tactfully missiled her when she reached out, implying that I had abruptly quit without notice. When Jane demanded to meet with me through my attorney, she was informed that I had dropped the divorce proceedings, settled with him, and he no longer represented me. With no other recourse, Jane resorted to filing for bankruptcy 4 months after my departure. As a result, she lost the house and had to part with her Cadillac, trading it in for a used Prius. Upon hearing this, I returned from Mexico and secured an apartment far away from her neighborhood, making every effort to avoid places where she might spot me. Meanwhile, Mia was 5 months pregnant and radiated an unparalleled allure. We resumed our relationship without the fear of being surveilled, spending nights together at each other's places 2 or 3 times a week. 2 months prior to Jane discovering my return, she confronted me in the parking lot after work. Ignoring her, I drove off, allowing her to follow me. I deliberately led her to Bud's Bar and Grill, where I intended to have a confrontation away from the prying eyes of our workplace. I was already seated at the bar, sipping on a Bud Light, when Jane stormed in, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me. She wasted no time in hurling insults as she made her way over. "Don't think you can run from me, you bastard." Knowing Jane's fiery temper, I anticipated her next move. Swiftly, I turned on my stool and caught her wrist mid-swing. With a firm grip, I warned her, "I have every reason to want to hurt you, Jane, so it's best you don't push me too far. Keep your hands to yourself unless you want to feel some real pain." Releasing her wrist, I continued, "I wasn't running from you. I drove slowly so you could follow me here. I wasn't going to expose your dirty laundry in the workplace parking lot. It doesn't matter here because everyone already knows you're unfaithful." "I want to talk to you," she demanded. "I don't want to talk to you." "I've heard enough of your lies," I retorted. "I want my money back." "What money would that be, Jane? You owe me the money you took out against the house, and half of everything else we had was mine, and I want it." "You won't get it, Jane. I consider it restitution for what you did to me. It's like what lawyers say in lawsuits, compensation for pain, suffering, and loss of conjugal rights. I think what I received nearly covers the pain and anguish I endured for the year and a half I endured living without intimacy while you were with someone else, and for the humiliation of being seen as a cuckold by everyone I knew. Damn you, Simon. I lost my parents' home because of you. Big deal, Jane. It couldn't have meant all that much to you since, as I recall, you moved out to shack up with another man. I mean it, Simon. I want that money. Here's a newsflash for you, Jane. You'll never get a dime from me. You tried to cheat me, got caught, and I made you pay. Hit over it. I guess we'll just have to see what the courts say. Doesn't matter what they say, Jane. Here's how it'll work. You'll have to get a lawyer and sue me for divorce to get me into court, so the court can issue an order regarding the division of assets. As soon as you sue, I'll countersue. A good lawyer can stall things for 6 to 8 months, and during that time, you'll be paying your lawyer. Can you afford to pay him to get nothing? I have all the evidence I need to fight you in court, and if I win, you'll be left empty-handed. Worst case scenario for me is that I'm ordered to split the assets. I'll say okay, judge, and leave the court. You and your lawyer wait and wait, but the money never comes. You call me, but I don't take your calls. So your lawyer, who you're still paying, goes back to court and gets a court order telling me to pay by such and such time. You and the lawyer wait and wait, and when the deadline arrives, you still haven't gotten a dime from me. Your lawyer, still billing you for his time, goes back to court and gets a judgment against me. I have no savings or checking accounts that can be attached. My card is leased, so there's nothing for you there. I live in a furnished apartment, so there isn't anything there you can get. All you can do with your judgment is garnish my wages, and the first time that happens, I'll quit my job. So what do we have here, Jane? A good year's worth of lawyer's fees out of your pocket for maybe $200 from one paycheck. All that's left for you to try is to go back to the judge and get him to threaten me with jail for contempt of court if I don't comply with his orders. All that will get you, Jane, is a postcard from me from some small fishing village in Mexico where I'll take up residence until my money runs out. And I've got a lot, Jane, thanks to you. Face it, Jane. You tricked me, got caught, and I got even with you. Consider yourself lucky. Think about what happened to your boyfriend, and consider yourself very lucky. He lost his balls, and now he can never sleep with another man's wife. You, on the other hand, can do whatever you want. I knew it. I knew you had something to do with what happened to Oscar. What do you think you know? And what you can prove are two very different things, Jane. By the way, how are things going with your love affair? From what I hear, you haven't seen the poor man since his first day in the hospital. What would be the point? You took away the only thing he had going for him. Oh, that's cold, Jane, even for you. It's the truth. He was extremely well endowed, and he was a marvelous lover, but I would have tired of him eventually and come home. Oh, Jane, if only I had known. All of the unpleasantness could have been avoided if I had just known that someday you would come back to me. Oh, darn, I guess by my actions I messed that up, didn't I? I'll have to carry that regret to my grave. What a joy life could have been if only we had communicated better. You can be such an asshole. Yes, Jane, and you're a worthless cheater. I finished my beer, got up and said, "Have a rotten life, Jane," then left the bar. 3 days later, I was served with divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. I didn't contest it, and she was awarded half of the marital assets, and I was ordered to pay her the money borrowed against the line of credit. I wished her luck in getting anything and tossed the final decree in the trash. She must have believed me when I told her how things would go, because I never heard from her again. One interesting thing came out of the mess. Everyone agreed that Young was a dipshit asshole, but even dipshit assholes can have a friend or two, and one of Young's was Jane's boss. He wasn't happy with the way she treated Young after his misfortune, so he fired her. Well, fired isn't the way it was put. A downturn in the economy necessitated a downsizing, and Jane was let go, but everyone knew that she was fired. She couldn't find work in our area, So she relocated to California, where she had some relatives, and no one, not even her sister, has heard from her since. There's one more chapter to this story, one that ended sadly, but also marked a glorious beginning. Mia welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world, and Neil showered her with love and adoration, spoiling her rotten. Uncle Simon became a regular presence, spending countless hours playing with little Olivia. Despite his health struggles, Neil kept the full extent of his condition hidden from Mia and me. He battled cancer, a truth he chose to shield Mia from. Unfortunately, the cancer was not caught in time, and it spread rapidly. After Neil's funeral, Mia handed me an envelope marked with my name and the words, "For Simon's eyes only." Unsure of its contents, Mia explained, "I haven't seen what's inside. It's addressed to you." I unfolded the letter and read its contents. "Hey bud, if you are reading this, I'm gone. There was a reason I picked you. Yes, it was me, not Mia, to father our child. I knew I wouldn't be there for them, and I wanted someone I knew I could trust to be around to watch over them. I knew I could count on you, so you got elected. Don't let me down, bud. Take good care of our girls." I handed the letter to Mia, who read it, and began to cry. I held her close, offering whatever comfort I could. Once her tears subsided, she looked at me and asked, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to do exactly what he knew I would do," I replied. "I'm going to take care of our girls." 6 months later, Mia and I exchanged vows and were married, honoring Neil's wishes and continuing to support each other through life's challenges. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.